Good morning. Anin Ridawalzek aren't Indijnakas Gowaba Bagunaka Gindujiba. Hello, everybody, and good morning. My name is Rita Walzek Arndt, and I am of Polish descent and a citizen of the White Earth Nation of Ojibwe. My role at the Minnesota Historical Society is a collections outreach specialist in the Native American Initiatives Department. Today, I'm happy to welcome you all to the virtual book launch for Voices from Pejuhutazizi, Dakota Stories and Storytellers by Teresa Peterson and Walter Super LaBatte Jr., and published by the Minnesota Historical Society Press. Although we are coming to you from the comfort of our homes, I would like to start with a land acknowledgement based on the location of the History Center, which is in St. Paul. I would like to say that my colleagues and I at MNHS acknowledge that Minnesota is Dakota and Ojibwe homeland. Dakota creation stories are centered in Mni Sota, and this regional territory is also an important place in traditional Ojibwe history, as well as those of other tribal nations. Today, Minnesota is both an ancestral and contemporary home to many Native people, including 11 Dakota and Ojibwe tribal nations. We would also like to acknowledge the labor of Black enslaved people who lived and worked in Minnesota at one of our sites, historic Fort Snelling, located at Bedote, which is a sacred site for Dakota people. These truths are the foundation of our work to provide historical context to events yesterday and hundreds of years ago. Today, this beautiful Saturday morning, we're honored to have authors Teresa Peterson and her uncle Walter Super LaBatte Jr. with us this morning. Teresa Peterson is an educator, tribal planner, and writer, and recently joined Indian Collective as program manager in the foundation. She is Sisseton Wahpeton, Dakota, and a member of the Upper Sioux Community. Walter LaBatte Jr., also known as Super, is an artist who tans hides, makes drums, beads moccasins, and prepares pashiapi. He is Sisseton Wahpeton, Dakota, and a member of the Upper Sioux Community. Super and Terry, why don't you introduce yourselves and tell us a little more about you, your family, and how you came to write this book. Oops.
Go ahead, Terry.
Dekshi. Hakana washte mitakiapi, chante washte na pechius apie, Damakota, Dakota ya Pejuhutazizi amakiapie, Wačicuŋhdinažiŋ Teresa Peterson amakiapie, Wačicuŋhdinažiŋ washte. So, good morning, relatives, greetings. I shake your hand with a good heart. I'm Dakota. My Dakota name is Little Oak Woman. I come from the place where they dig the yellow medicine, and I'm just really happy to see all of you. Dekshi.
Oh, mitakiapi. Greetings, my relatives. I'm Super, aka Walter, aka Wațicuŋhdinażiŋ. I'm glad to be here. I'm not going to translate my Dakota name because you're going to have to read the book to find out what it means. So that'll give you motivation to read the book. That was my paternal grandfather's name, and what was given to me by my maternal grandfather. My maternal grandfather named all of us kids. We all got Dakota names way before it became popular or made a. It was just something that happened, and there was no ceremony, no big doings about it. When you got about 5 years old, then your parents told you what your Indian name was. So that was back then, different today. But anyway, I'm retired, union construction worker, artist, maybe a craftsman. I don't know, whatever. But I like to do beadwork, make buckskin. And I like to tell my stories. My stories started to fall out of my head when I reached a certain age. I always like to say when I was 40 years old, somebody would ask me, I don't know nothing. I don't know nothing. And I was telling that to Danny Seaboy from Siston one time. And he said, oh my God, that's my experience too. He says, I never knew I do all these things. So that's me. Super. Wațicuŋhdinażiŋ imakiapido. Oh, pidamaido. Ahí está.
So I think we wanted to start with telling us about how you came to write this book.
Sure, I can share a little bit there. So this was jeepers, maybe 20 years ago or more. I started going down to Phoenix and visit my great aunt Cerise, my grandma's sister. Of course, Phoenix was a beautiful place to go and retreat in the winter. And she would, tell me about her growing up and tell me stories. And my mother had given me a family book, and it's a self-published book that she wrote, which contained basically a letter to, that my great-grandpa Waŋbdițka wrote to his daughters, his 5 daughters. And in there, he tells of their grandmother growing up, and he tells a lot of stories that he heard amongst Dakota people, including her. And so I asked her about that. And she shared a lot about her growing up and about the book. Well, over time, I would share these stories because it was just a great read. And they'd say, well, where can I get a copy of what was out of print? And so her and I agreed at some point that I would somehow get this book republished. And, maybe I would add some pieces to it. Well, I, had kids, I went to school and had a job, and, time just passed by. And I even remember at one point I was like, boy, I got to get down and talk to her some more. And, so I went down to visit her. Well, actually I made arrangements to go visit her, and I was going to go visit her 2 weeks before her 101st birthday. Can you imagine? And she was just still sharp as a tack, but she had ended up in the hospital, and I called her and I said, well, should I still come? And she goes, well, it's up to you. And I didn't go, and she passed away 2 weeks later. And so, this commitment to her carried with me over the years, and I would work on it a little bit here and there. And Super actually has the original letter and stories that our grandpa wrote. But at some point, I asked him to join writing this book because he's actually our family historian and storyteller. And so, yeah, it's a long time coming, but we finally got it done. Super, what do you want to share about this book?
Well, that goes back many years that my aunt gave me the original, Grandpa's original writings, because I like to say that when he died, I remember all of the adults in our extended family. They all had the same lament that they wished that they had written these stories down because they thought they were all lost. And so it was with some surprise that Cerise gave me the originals, and I still have them, and they're my grandpa had beautiful handwriting. Oh my gosh, beautiful cursive writing. And so we were all, or I was really surprised that we thought that all these stories were lost, but he was able to save these by writing these down. And I used that same tactic of the things that I know I want to write down and save for the next generation. So that was I guess my part in how this all came about. So
thank you. And can you share who this photo is showing?
That's Grandpa Waŋbdițka. He was thoroughly Dakota. He was only white in his genes. It was, in fact, when I didn't know that he was not Indian when I was growing up because he talked nothing but Dakota. And so he was thoroughly Dakota. One elder in our community who was fluent, she kind of laughingly said, Super, I have to admit that I used to have to go to your grandpa to ask how you say this in Dakota. so he was Dakota. Yeah.
I have a similar story of an elder over in Siston would tell me, different stories. He was a storyteller himself, and he told of coming over with his family and visiting Grandpa, and he said he'd take a little hand drum out from under his bed and then sing. And he said, I thought he was Dakota. Yeah.
Yeah.
Okay. Well, thank you for sharing. Terry, in the book you share, I have come to understand that stories are integral in shaping our cultural identities. How have these stories shaped your cultural identity?
I think I'm just going to read a little bit and then I'll kind of reflect on that. So this is just a piece in the intro that, I'm kind of exploring like what stories mean to me and a little bit of growing up. I seem to have a deeply rooted desire and pull to be in this place with my relatives at Pejuhutazizi. My childhood memories of fun-filled visits connect seasonal experiences to place and land. For example, in the winter, we climbed to the top of the hill where my cousins lived. Then we slid down the hill past another aunt's house and finally down to the giant oaks below my grandma and grandpa's place. We repeated this climb over and over until we could not feel our fingers or one of us was injured. In fact, I hold the scars in story to prove it. In the summer, my cousins and I rode horses up and down the deer and people trails, bringing them to the creek to quench their thirst. Us girls with our feet kicked up along their manes, hoping they wouldn't roll us into the water. Hot summer days, we swam at the creek and dared each other to swim over beneath the culvert. Hiking to the river bottom, we climbed over giant felled cottonwoods to reach the Mni Sota Makoce, where we sunned near shallow pebbled areas and kept a lookout for snakes. We pestered their mom, my summer mother, for candy sold at the tribal government building where she worked. We played hide and seek and kickball with the kids on the next hill over, and were among many more taking turns running around the seated circle of duck, duck, gray duck. We drank from the spring on the side road past one aunt's home to another. During powwow time, my cousins and I helped collect entrance dollars from white visitors and pointed to where the secret spring was. As long as we ate our egg and spam sandwiches and were back by the evening, we could be feral children exploring the hills and valleys along the Minnesota River. These were liberating experiences with relatives that looked more like me than my Polish and German neighbors made me feel at home. So I just share that because, all those experiences being with my cousins and my aunties and my grandma and being on land, all of those really, connected me, helped me understand like I'm connected to this place and that I have all these relatives that I'm connected to. So that helped shape my kind of foundation to who I am. And I want to just share one other little piece about about the stories here. So some of the stories in this collection connect the dots and fill the voids and gaps of my story. Some provide insight into why things were and perhaps still are. Some stories give me a compassionate understanding of so many things. Most importantly, these stories are important to me because they tell of who I belong to. I am of the people who dig the yellow medicine and the great-great-granddaughter of Tashina Suspechawi.
Thank you so much, Terry. Super. Terry describes you as the family historian and storyteller. How were you nurtured into this role, and how does one become a storyteller?
I suppose it all started a reflection on stories that my dad told me And when I went off to college at Macalester, I was initially a history major, but I got tired of writing research papers at 3 o'clock in the morning to get them in. And at the time I was at Macalester, there was a 2-year German 2 years of foreign language requirement. So I had taken German at the time, and I found it easy. So I switched to German, and I got my degree in German. But that history, learning history, never left me. In fact, when after I graduated, I found out that I had time on my own to study history, Dakota history, and it really started because all these stories that my dad told me, they were pretty horrendous, I might say. Him recounting his mother was on that walk from Camp Release in Montevideo to Lower Sioux and then to Fort Snelling. And he recounted the horrible things that happened during that time. So I wanted to know if there was a written record of that encounter, and it was much broader than that. It was the treaties, how we all got screwed out of Minnesota, and it made me quite an angry person at the time. And when I got into reading the written record of that era, oh my God, it was much, much worse than what my dad told me. And that kind of sparked an interest in family history, and I did research on our family, going back however. I was initially kind of skeptical about doing Dakota family history because I didn't think there was any records, but there was a ton of records out there. The government took plenty of records of Dakota people, census records, annuity records, and probate records, and I always say, kind of be careful of what you write to the government because that stays with you forever and ever. I got a personal experience with that, and from that I learned no, don't defame people to the government because that's still there. So I guess that was the beginning of my endeavor into storytelling. And at that time, I heard all these stories when I was a little kid and older, and I never thought I would remember them, and I always say that those elders of that period didn't make a big deal about it. They didn't tell you, you remember this story because this is an important story. It was just ordinary telling, and like I say many times, I was raised here without electricity. That was one of the institutional racism of the time, where the power company wouldn't bring power out to the reservation, even though the 1930s, the rural electrification program came out, and all the Wațicu farmers around here all had power, but we never did. So we didn't have entertainment. Our entertainment was my dad telling stories at night. So Unktomi stories, he's the trickster story. There's tens of thousands. There's many, 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 many stories that we all learned, and so I don't know where the hell I'm going with this, but that's how I got involved in being a historian, perhaps a storyteller, perhaps a human being. But anyway, that's me. So.
Thank you. Thank you so much for sharing. I love listening to you talk, and I'm sure everybody else is enjoying it as well. So the book has a lot of Dakota language sprinkled throughout. It includes a glossary at the back. What was your intent to including Dakota words or phrases throughout? Terry, do you want to start?
Well, sure. I don't think you can tell Indigenous story without including Dakota words and concepts in that worldview. So that's first and foremost. I would say the other thing, this is really an opportunity for people to learn Dakota words, especially those of us living in Mni Sota Makoce. You know, Dakota is the language of this land. So I think it's an opportunity for people to learn.
That reminds me of a story my mom used to tell, or comments my mom used to tell. She would say, you know, we Dakota people, we had to learn English. And the white people, they don't bother to learn how to pronounce all these Dakota names in Minnesota. You know, and she always used to particularly name Maramidai. Maramidai is the Wațicuŋ pronunciation of Matobade. And she said, Matobade, there's nothing hard to learn how to say Matobade. Owotana, Makato. She always used to say the Wațicuŋs are lazy. They don't want to learn the right way. Or they have no, it really is, they don't have any respect for Dakota. So that, yes, there are some, you can't tell, sometimes you need to use Dakota words sometimes in these stories to get maybe the full meaning through it. Yeah. Okay. Enough said.
Thank you. Now I want to kind of shift to how the book is organized. It's organized into 4 parts, returning through story, the voices, the stories, and a story of belonging. How did you come to this arrangement? Terry?
Sure. Well, I would just say first that it was challenging because there's multiple voices and across multiple generations. And so how to make sense of that for readers was a challenge, but Anne was awesome. And so, you know, MHS too as well, to figure out like how to make that happen. So I would say that first of all. And then the other thing is that, you know, to see, like when I scanned across all the different stories, to me, I could see a pattern, you know, pattern of like different types of stories. I was like, okay, here's a batch of stories that tell about land, or here's some that tell about how traditions are passed on, or values, or these are about our heroes that aren't told, you know, in mainstream education. And if there weren't enough stories for a section, then that wasn't included. But in terms of like kind of those bigger 4 parts, some of those are shaped by questions. And I want to really give credit to my Native writers group, the Native women writers group that I'm in. Diane Wilson facilitates it. And my group really challenged me to think about, to go deeper, to really ask, how do these stories impact you? And kind of like, so what, now what? Like, what difference did they make? And so I had to do that kind of hard work of really going beyond, you know, just that organizing, and really ask myself what those meant to me. So Dekshi, what do you think?
Well, I was really amazed and appreciate how you organize these things, because in my head, I was wondering, how is she going to bring these disparate stories into a understandable whole? So many thanks to you for finding that, because even with my stories, I never realized that there was themes running through all my different stories. So yeah, you did a good job of that. Something I couldn't have done.
So you're saying all storytellers need somebody like Terry to help organize their.
I guess so.
No, he can just recite stories like off the top of his head, which blows my mind. I'm not that person. I can write, but and organize, but I don't have that gift. And I don't know how many times he'd have to explain stuff over to me or remind me. So I've learned to like take a lot of notes. Yeah.
Great. Terry, you share several of your Grandpa Fred's stories, particularly in the sections on heroes, reconciliation, and belonging. You also provide sidebars in the book that provide readers with some historical background to your family stories. Can you talk a little more about the convergence of your family stories and with the history of Dakota community?
One of the things I think, that both Dexy and I have shared kind of over and over is that these stories don't represent Dakota people in whole. They don't represent even our whole community. They're stories that were shared amongst the family. And of course, they connect, broadly to our community and to Dakota people, like all stories do. And so part of that context that we include helps people make that, make that connection. And that's like with any story, like they're connected to other things, like to things that are happening to other places, to people. So that's part of that. And I think, when I think about stories, that's kind of like the brilliance behind stories, is that they really help us connect at a human to human level. It really brings out the humanity in all of us. If you share a story, somebody starts saying, oh yeah, I have a grandma like that, or, so that's part of that, helping drop some of those connections in. And I think the other big thing why we provided some of this historical background to it is that, my grandpa's stories, like he was born in the 1800s and he uses even language that is unfamiliar to me. And so it was, or even history. So it's important to kind of include some of that context, for readers.
While you were putting this book together, was there anything surprising that you found out relating to what white history wrote versus what family stories were?
Well, that's kind of just how history is, right? It's always told from one perspective, and that's kind of the issue. That's the problem I have with, like master narratives or what we learn in school, is that we don't connect to them often because it's told from one voice and it's told as the truth. And so that's what I love about these stories. Like all of these stories are from, we have all these different perspectives and they're all true. So, yeah.
Thank you for sharing that. And yeah, I learned a lot while reading through the book. It was very exciting, and I enjoyed how I sometimes Super would talk about something, and then I hear from your great grandfather, and like just all of it going back and forth. I highly recommend everybody to read this book.
I want to point out in this picture too, like
yes.
And you can barely see her, is my grandma is tucked way, she's probably like 1 or 2 here. And she's got a little plaid dress on that matches her sister, but that's my grandma. And then of course her mother, and then Tashina Suspecha, on the side there. And those are her 5. So these are the 5 daughters that Grandpa wrote to tell of their mother and grandmother. Mm-hmm.
Great, thank you for sharing. And we're about halfway through our talk today, and feel free, please, those who are tuning in, to put any questions in the comment section, and we will get to that later in this talk. Super, what stories would you like to share that you shared in the book with viewers today?
I was kind of relying on things that come to mind right away, because I have nothing made up to write about. But I was remembering the story or the event of my aunt giving me the grandpa's writings. And at that time, 3 years before that is when I started to dance. And of course, at that time, I didn't have the money to buy an outfit because it was rather expensive. So I figured, well, I'll make my own outfit. So I wanted to make a vest. So I started making, I started on the vest too, because that was the hardest to make, or the most. And then my plan on the vest was to bead this front all red and then put a design on the back. But as I was beading the two fronts, I decided, no, that doesn't. I got a better idea. I got to put a design on here, and then so. But I didn't have nothing to put on there. I was wondering what should I put on there, and I remember going to bed that night and sometimes during that night this design came out to me, and it's in that period of sleep or half awake. I don't remember if I was asleep or if I was awake, and I got this design of this teepee in this circle, which showed that it was there was light in there because the smoke hole in the entranceway was showing light coming out. And I remember that night thinking, I should get up and draw this out, otherwise I'll forget it in the morning. But I was too lazy, too sleepy, so I just forgot about it and went to bed. I went back to sleep. And in the morning when I woke up, of course, I didn't remember my dream. But in the afternoon, I started beading again. And when I started beading again, that brought out that picture that I saw. So I quickly drew it out and I used that design on my vest. And I never thought much about it after that. 2 years later, my aunt comes by and brings me the papers of my grandpa's. And I started reading them, and Grandpa's talking about this ancestor of ours named Pejuhutazizi. And when I read that name, it about popped up off the page and slapped me in the face, because that means Pejuhutazizi means lighted teepee woman. And I immediately recognized that was the person who brought me that design in that dream. And I still have that vest. I gave the rest of my outfit away, but I kept that vest because it's has that special significance of Pejuhutazizi. So that's one of the stories that I kind of remembered while we were on this talk. So
you should tell one of your ghost stories.
Okay, this is not really a ghost story. This happened right behind me here. Right behind me here. When I was working in the cities, my mom said, it's time, you should come home now. You should come home soon. And union construction workers, we could retire at 52. So I was nearing that age. And so my mom told me that I should build a house. So sometimes the universe makes things possible that you don't recognize at first. And anyway, she gave me some money to start with, and then I cashed in some CDs, and then I started to build. And I got to go back. I got to go back and tell I got to go back and tell a previous event that ties into this. When I was in eighth grade math, we learned about compound interest. How you could become rich by compound interest, but it also the example that we understood was, or that the teacher taught was about buying a house. At that time, a house cost $30,000. So you know how old I am. So they, but if you got a mortgage for 20 years, you end up paying double that. You'd pay $60,000 for that house. And I came home and I told my mom, I said, "That is just ridiculous. That's probably why I'm still a Marxist, a follower of Groucho, Harpo, and Zeppo." But anyway, I was angry at that. That capitalism would make you pay double for a house. So I told my mom when I was in eighth grade that I was never going to do that. That I was going to build my own house, and I wouldn't make the banker rich. So when I became an adult, I would see these 20-year-old apprentice carpenters buying houses, and I suppose they must have had rich parents or something. But anyway, I struggled. I couldn't even save enough money for a down payment on a house. And then it came to me to build my house, and the universe made ways for me to build my own house. I was skilled. All I had to do was pay for the material, and I had lots of carpenter friends and plumber friends and electrician friends who helped me build my house. And then after that, I realized what I had. After I built my house without a mortgage, I remembered what I put out to the universe when I was in eighth grade. Mm. And the universe made it possible for me to not pay double for my house. So that's the beginning. That's okay. So now I'll go back to my original story. When I was building my house, I came back and I stayed with my parents while I built my house. And of course I had to bring my dog, my Springer Spaniel. I love Springer Spaniels. And Gus was my dog. And when we were staying down here with my parents, Gus started to accept that my parents' house was his house. And he became protective of it. He became really protective of it. And one time late at night, my brother Wayne came back from 48th. And he came in the house and Gus wouldn't let him in the house. He was growling and barking because he took Wayne as an intruder. So there was a big ado about him. And so I finally came in, and Wayne kicked him. Oh, geez, he was mad then. He was ready to tear him apart. So I came in and I come on, Gus. That's so. But after that incident, Gus and Wayne didn't get along. Every time Gus would see Wayne, he'd bark and growl at him, and they just hated each other, or at least Gus did. So about a couple years later, Wayne died, and we had his funeral across the street in the round building there. And my mom asked me if I would speak at his wake, addressing the cause of his death, which was alcoholism, because she didn't want to sweep this issue under the rug, so to speak, like so many other people pretend that, oh, this person did it, you know. So I did, and I did a fairly good job, because people come up to me and say that you did a good job. You did a good job. So I came home and, you know, went to bed, and my house wasn't fully complete. So So I just had a mattress on the floor here right behind me, and that's where I slept. And so Gus and I were sleeping. And I don't know, sometime 12 o'clock, 1 o'clock at night, Gus gets up and he runs to the door and he's growling and barking. And what the hell's going on? I turn the light on and I could see him backing up, growling, backing up, growling, backing up, growling. And I didn't see nothing, but Gus sure did. And then I quickly recognized what was going on, and that was Wayne was come to make his last visit, I suspect. So I greeted him and I welcomed him. And Gus finally settled down that he was okay with Wayne coming for a visit. So, he stayed for a bit and left. And I have no doubt that was Wayne coming for a visit, because Gus acted the same way as he did in life. He would growl and back up and growl and back up and bark, and so if that was a ghost, I was not scared. I mean, that was my brother. That's my brother. My brother came to pay his last respect, or last visit, I guess, or something, whatever, and then he went off to the spirit world. So that's one of many spiritual encounters I've had. So that's my story.
Thank you for sharing. So Super, what do you hope that readers will get from some of the stories you share? Like, what do you want to come across as you share all these stories?
I don't know. I suppose each story has a specific thing to take out of it. I suppose this story tells you don't be scared. Don't be scared when your relatives come by to visit you. There's other stories I suppose have a little different. I don't know if they have. I don't even know if they have a lesson. They're just stories. Yeah. So.
Some of the stories I learned a lot about gardening while reading this book. And you throw a lot of science along with your stories about the corn. So I want to know how did you find out all this information about pH balances and all these other things, and how all of it works together to create the corn that you plant?
Well, I was raised on a farm, so I learned a lot just from farming with my dad. And of course, with corn, I know that corn is a big user of nitrogen. And so when you plant corn, you can't plant it in the same spot year after year after year. You have to replenish that soil with nitrogen. And today's farmers, they use chemical fertilizer to replenish that. But we were organic farmers at the time, though that word was never really used, because when we farmed, there was no such thing as chemical fertilizer. So I've always learned that horse manure had a lot of nitrogen in it. And I don't know. I suppose from biology that you learn the acid base. The neutral is 7, and I don't know how I learned it, but anyway, I know that you got to put nitrogen in, and as far as taking that hull off, wood ashes is how Dakotas do it. My grandpa used to call it lied corn, Lyed, as in lie. And the pH of 7 is neutral, and then you as you go 8, 9, 10, and I guess I looked it up that wood ashes has a pH of 10 to 13 or something, and so I don't know. That's how I learned about some other people, because they don't have access to wood stove anymore. They use something else. I can't think of it, but I still use the wood ashes. So.
Super. Do you want to share that story about when you kind of peddled some of your corn and what your mom had, what grandma had to say?
Oh, yeah. When I moved back here, I asked Mom, I said, who raises Indian corn and make pashtai? And she says, oh, no, nobody does that anymore. And it really made me sad. I was really sad because growing up, I know how good pashtai is. So I decided on my own that I'm going to raise pashtai. And so I did. And then I started to sell. And I asked my mom, I says, Mom, how much do they think I should sell my Indian corn for? And she quoted me this low price, something that my grandpa probably would have sold back in the 30s or something. And I told her, Mom, I says, those people at Siston, they sell their waskuya, which is another Indian corn deal. They charge $20 a quart. I think I should sell mine at least 10. And she says, well, if you can get that. My mom was kind of funny. She didn't know she didn't realize she was funny. But anyway, that's my mom telling me that my corn wasn't probably worth a lot of money. But anyway. So.
Oh, thank you for sharing all of that. And I guess I'm just really impressed about you remembering science stuff because I can't remember science stuff. So I am impressed.
Yeah.
So Terry, would you like to share what your favorite story is in the book?
Sure. Of course, all of them are just really good. And they're a good story when you read them again and read them each time, and they still make you laugh and cry and or gain additional insight. So they're all good. I've read them all probably 100 times. I would say the one, and I'll just keep it really short, but because then maybe you have to go and read it, like Super says. One of them is the story of my great-great-grandmother, Tashina Suspechawi, who in the story that Grandpa tells is when she, she was born a long time ago in the 1800s. And then during the war, the family was moving, fleeing north, eventually up into Canada. And she was 10 or 12 years old when this happened. And the people that she was with, her family and whoever else, were camped and had to flee. Soldiers were chasing them and they had to leave camp real quickly. And the bag of bullets was left behind. And so it tells where she volunteered to go back and get that bag of bullets, and then soldiers were shooting at her. And I just remember when I read that story, I was thinking, that is just incredible. Like, who was I at 10 or 12 years old, for her to be that courageous and brave. And then, of course, as you continue to read each of, these amazingly resilient and strong women, Dakota women, and what they've gone through, including even that little girl, my grandma there, her mother died shortly after this picture. And, and of course she went to boarding school and things like that. So, learning about their path in life and all that they went through does a couple things for me. One is I think about maybe a little bit of that courage or bravery. We know about epigenetics now, and maybe some of that is somehow got transferred to me. I hope so anyway, a little bit. The other thing is I think about the things that they went through are tragic and they're horrible. And like Super talked earlier, they can make you angry. But I've told my own children, you're going to learn more and more of this history and you hear about it. And just remember, because I think about my grandma. She was really funny. She was just, I spent a lot of time with her, and I never got the impression that she was angry or bitter. And so I tell my boys that don't be angry or bitter, because they didn't go through those things for you to be that way. So those are the takeaway for me. Yeah.
A quick remark about that. My aunt Harriet was telling me that when their mother died, my mom was only 2 years old, and Harriet said that my mom she'd go off looking for her mother. Man, I felt sorry for my mom. I want to cry when I remember that. So yeah, she had a tough life. Lose your mother when you're 2 years old. Yeah. Wow. So.
Thank you both so much for sharing so much. I believe we have some questions ready, and if anybody has any questions, please put them in the comments, and we will ask Superintendent Terry about them. So Richard Weber asks, would enjoy more history on the naming meaning. I'm assuming this maybe has to do with Dakota names. I'm assuming. I'm hopefully assuming correctly.
Well, Dakota names, they can either be as my experience is they can either be transferred from a previous ancestor. Like my name, it comes from my paternal grandfather, but then most of the other then Gordy was named after a great-grandfather, Ohia. But the other names Grandpa gave, I don't know where he got his names. My dad would always, when one of the relatives came to Dad and asked him that to give him an Indian name or some such, he would say, "Okay, I'll think about that. I'll think about it." And then when it came to me to do that same thing, I had that same thing. I'll think about it, and on my walks or something, that's where I connect with that next world. It seems to be, and then that's where those names come down, and I always think, "Oh, thank you, Dad." He's knowing that I need to come up with a name, and so that's how. That's my experience of how names come from, And of course, I'm not. Of course, you have to, as far as meanings, you almost have to know. Sometimes there's a story behind that name, and so that helps in translation. Like the first part of my Indian name, Wațicu, most people would understand it as a white man. But for the longest time, my grandpa, he always he called that spirit instead of white man. And I never knew why I just accepted it as that. But later I learned that before the Wațicu came, that was known as that spirit that travels with you and tells you that this is not a good deal to do. This is not you may suffer some consequences here, or this is a good thing to do. So, and I understand it came from those rock spirits, Sichu or Shichu. I've heard it used both ways. So without that story knowledge from my grandpa, that name would translate as something different. So it's important to know the story or the meaning. All right.
I was just going to share, Grandpa gave me my Dakota name, and Dexy here gave my boys their names. So we're carrying on that tradition.
Great. Celeste is inquiring, can Super tell why he chose to learn German and a bit about his travels to Europe and how people reacted to him there?
Well, like I said, when I was in high school, maybe in ninth grade or something, the counselor came and speak to all the students. He says, you know, if you want to go to college, you have to have a foreign language. So that was my motivation for taking a foreign language, not because I wanted to learn a language, but that was the step one to going to college. And at that time, they only offered German in high school, and I kind of enjoyed it. I was able to make sounds in the German sounds that a lot of German American students couldn't because they have similar guttural sounds like ich. You know, Dakotas have words like hey. So I was able to pronounce, and like I said, it when I got to college, I got tired of history, so I switched to German. And a funny story, there was you could spend a semester in University of Vienna, Uni Wien, and I wanted to go. My mom didn't want me to go because she this was during the Cold War, and she says, "Isn't that Iron Curtain over there or someplace?" You know. But anyway, I didn't get to go. They picked somebody else. So, and I guess maybe that was in the back of my mind all these years. So when we went to Vienna a couple of years ago, that's the first thing Karen and I went to. We went to the Uni Wien, and I says, "I'm 50 years late, but here I am. I'm at Uni Wien." So, I enjoy it, speaking German over there. I always I always say that some people don't, when they see me speaking German, their eyes and their ears are in conflict because that doesn't make sense. But anyway, all right.
Great. I'm not sure if there's more questions. Oh, there's a nice compliment on the family tree visuals and how helpful they are. And I have to say that was the first thing I looked at because I am a genealogy nerd as well. So I love seeing how people are related.
Yeah, we included that for the nerds.
Well, thank you. All right. So as we're winding down, I would just love to hear kind of your last thoughts, Terry and Super, about this book, this journey, and how anything that you would like to share with the audience before we wrap up today.
I have a piece I just want to read, and then Super can bring it home. So this book has taken me close to 20 years to complete as I have been on a healing journey. And I hope that you as the reader, you'll reclaim your stories of values, traditions, stories of place, stories that entertain, and those that reconcile and make things right. What does it say about our society when there is only one story of our collective history that is widely told, shared, or printed? What if we all reclaimed our stories, took the time to share them, listened deeply to others for understanding, and shared and validated these stories in our education systems? If we all reclaim our stories, we will begin to eliminate the disparaging narratives that cause invisibility, harm, and alienation. I hope that the storytellers in this collection provoke the storyteller in you. That's what I hope to people get out of this book.
Well, I guess my question was in the introduction of the book. I asked who of you young people are going to be the storyteller of tomorrow. because I certainly, when I was young, I certainly didn't think I was going to be, but I somehow listened and recorded those things in my head. So maybe there's a youngster now will be tomorrow's storyteller. Hope you will get inspiration from these, from this book, from the stories to carry on. Carry on. Isn't there a song, Carry On, Carry On? No.
I'm sure there is. Great. Thank you so much for all of this. And thank you all the viewers for tuning in. And this will be recorded so you can be able to share it with your friends and family in the future. Thanks again.
Oh, geez, it's going to be recorded now.
Thank you, Rita, for having us. Appreciate it.
No, thank you. Thank you.